الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله اللهم علمنا ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما إنك أنت العليم الحكيم وصلى الله على سيدنا Muhammad وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أجمعين. Yes, so today, inshallah, we will jump into the first chapter, which is called The Inward and the Outward, or Religion and Judgment, i.e., Diyanatan wa Qada'an. So to pick up from where we left off, Imam al-Buti talks about in this chapter, he gets into, because just to recap, we're trying to answer this question. What Imam al-Bulti is doing is he's trying to answer this question as to why is it that despite the abundance of Islamic activity, what you could call Islamic activity, so we have so many um, events going on, we have so many conferences going on, we have so many courses and deen intensives and so much dawah work going on. Why is that we have all this activity, but the Muslims are not where they were in the past? They haven't reached those heights or the peak of civilization like in the past, in the height of the Ottoman era or so forth. Why are we still in this situation? And what he's going to get at in this chapter is we have to look at the intentions and the reality of people's hearts who are engaged in this work. So we can have a lot of activity and action and events and things going on out there, but what's the real consequence? And I was thinking about this yesterday. I mean, for example, we have in the West, especially, I don't know what it's like in Singapore and Malaysia, but in the West, there's all this talk about Islam is the fastest growing religion, or they use this phrase goes around a lot, the slogan goes around a lot. But when when I wrote my book, The Big Step, in 2018, and I looked at studies about what happens to converts, because there's a lot of people out there. Not only is there's that broad claim of Islam is the fastest growing religion. There are certain individuals who will make claims like, well, I gave such and such lecture, or I've given so many talks, and 1,000 people have said shahad at my hands, or 3,000 people have said shahad at my hands. But then the question is, where are these people? What happens to them afterwards? So what I went into in my book as I talked about, okay, what are the reasons why someone becomes Muslim? Is it because they are convinced of Islam? And if I ever write that book again, I'll probably change it, not just a conviction, but is the actual a genuine love of Allah. That's what's really, really important, is the love of Allah. Or is it people becoming to Islam for other reasons? They might have social reasons, they might have emotional reasons, they might have psychological reasons. They might say, okay, you know, I, I'm going to become Muslim because I want to marry so and so, and I can't do it unless I'm Muslim. And then these people, when Islam, or when they're converted to Islam, no longer meets the need that made them become Muslim, when that goes, they leave. They leave Islam because their needs are no longer being met. So that's why I said in the book that there's something called convert recidivism, which is when a convert changes his mind. That happens. That's true. So this all dovetails together. We have to get to, because again, I mentioned this because the Imam talks about the Dawah movement, and there's so much Dawah going on. But okay, like what kind of people are being produced? Are we getting high quality, low maintenance converts, or are we getting high maintenance, low quality converts? What are we getting out of this? So this is part of the overall question that Imam al-Bulti is trying to answer. Why are we not seeing the results of all this activity? So to recap, he talks about the outward and the inward, right? So there's no doubt that when we talk about the commands of the Sharia, of the revealed law, there are two categories. There are outward statements and actions. There's praying, there's fasting, there's amr bil ma'ruf, nahy anil munkar, right? Enjoying the right, forbidding the wrong, working for the benefit of Muslims. And then there are inward things that are connected to the soul and the heart, such as sincerity, humility, love and hatred for the sake of Allah, fear of Allah's threat, hope for Allah's reward, and so on and so forth. And the same with the prohibitions. There are outward things that Allah has told you not to do, drinking, smoking, fornicating, gambling, all these kinds of things. But then there are things that are in the heart, such as jealousy, envy, ostentation, bearing grudges, malice, and so on and so forth. They go together. Now, you can't separate one from the other. Right? And that's why we have these terms qada and with the anatin as well that people use. So, for example, um, I think I mentioned this last time. Like the fuqaha, they use this example of qada and with the anatin. So um, let's say that a man divorces his wife, but he uses a phrase that is known as kinaya. Because when a man divorces his wife, the statement can be sarih, it can be clear and unequivocal, like he says, "You are divorced," and that effectuates a divorce. Or he could say something indirect. He could say something like, "Get out of my house," or "I don't want to see you." Now, if he uses an indirect statement, which is called kinaya, it depends on what he means. So here's the example that the fuqaha give. And I read this in one of the books when I was doing the Hukuk Zawjain book, because this is also discussed in there. So let's say, for example, if a man says to his wife, "Get out of my house," and in his heart he means divorce, he means it as a divorce. If he goes to a qadi, if he's brought before a qadi, a judge, and the judge says, "What did you mean when you said that?" And he says, "Oh no, I just meant it literally. I just meant get out of my house. I didn't mean divorce." So let's say he lies. Dianatin, this is the term dianatin in terms of religion. Dianatin, i.e., between him and Allah, he's divorced. It's divorced because that's what he meant, right? The qadi, the qadi will say you're still married because that's all he has to go by, right? The qadi can only go by the outward. The qadi can't open his heart and see what's there. It's impossible. So the qadi will say, okay, that's what you meant. You're married. So there's no issue there. There's no sin on the wife because she doesn't know any better. But for him, now he's in an adulterous relationship, right? If that was a final divorce, if he meant a final divorce, you see, that's the big difference. Another way to look at it, and I might have mentioned this last time, another way to look at this is the difference between when we talk about our prayers, there's a big difference between the sihha of a prayer, the validity of a prayer, and the qubul of a prayer, i.e., the acceptance of a prayer. There's a difference between whether a prayer is valid and whether a prayer is accepted by Allah. So when it comes to the validity of a prayer, a faqih or a mufti or a qadi, or in fact anyone who knows fiqh can tell you whether your prayer is valid or not. These people, they can ask, they can say, okay, did you fulfill all the conditions of the prayer, the shurut? Did you have wudu? Did you have ghusl? Was your place of prayer free of najasa and your clothes and your body? Were you facing the qibla? Were you had the prayer time come in? Okay, good. Okay, and then when you prayed, did you have the takbir al-ihram? Did you make the intention? We're Shafi's here. Did you make the intention? Oh, while saying the takbir, while saying the takbir al-ihram, did you recite the Fatiha? Did you go into a ruku'? Did you all these things? Right? If you fulfill all those conditions and all those integrals, all the shurut and all the arkan are there, the faqih or the mufti or whoever it is who knows fiqh can say to you, yes, your prayer is valid. But no one can tell you whether your prayer is accepted. That's between you and Allah. Because no one knows what's going on in your heart while you're praying. Were you showing off in your prayer? Were you putting on a beautiful recitation because you knew other people were there? Were you trying to do the perfect ruku' because you knew people were watching you? Like, oh, someone's here. I better make my back straight, right? Or you made your sujood super long because other people were present. Maybe while you were praying, you were distracted. Maybe you're a businessman, and while you were praying, you were doing your accounts, right? You're going. You think, oh, I have there's 4 quarters for my accounts, 4 quarters of the year, so I'll just do one account per rak'ah. People do this. You may be thinking about things, or you're just distracted. You're thinking about your next work. You're thinking about your next assignment. You're thinking about what you have to do after you pray. There are all these distractions, and the qadi or the faqih, the mufti, whoever it is, they can't make a judgment of that because they don't know. They don't know what you're doing in your head when you pray. So that's why there's that difference. You have to think about there's qada and what they call qada, which is what a qadi can have influence over, or human beings can have some sort of influence over. They can judge, they can pass a judgment. But then there's dianatin, which is between you and Allah, and there has to be both have to be fulfilled. We don't distinguish between the two. So what the Imam goes on to say in this chapter is he makes it very clear that the terms are different. People might say inward, outward. People might say sharia and haqiqa. People might say diyan and qada. But whatever terms you use, you have to understand that this is a reality of Islam. Don't worry so much about the terms. This is a reality of Islam, and you cannot separate uh, one from the other. And this is why he says that if the tributaries of slavehood are cut off from a Muslim's heart, it is simply not possible for him to draw near to Allah. So if someone is doing all the outward actions of Islam, so someone is praying, someone is fasting, someone is reciting Quran, someone is doing all the things that they're supposed to do outwardly, but inwardly, their heart is full of ostentation, the heart is full of arrogance, the heart is full of grudges towards other Muslims, then what's the benefit? There's no benefit. There's all outward, but no inward. Um, it's like a car. It's like a car with no engine. What's the point, right? I was actually thinking of that metaphor earlier today because I don't know if they ever do that. I don't know if you guys do this over in Singapore, Malaysia. When I was a kid growing up in Canada, sometimes they used to put on when you're driving the highways, they'd have these billboards like advertising for cars. And sometimes instead of just a picture of a car, they actually put a real car up there, right, for dramatic effect, something to make it look like it's driving through the billboard, or they put on display. Now, obviously, a car is very, very heavy, and the heaviest part is what? It's the engine, right? So in order to put the car up there, they'd have to take the engine out. Take the engine out, and they put this car up there. So you look at it, think, that's a nice car, but it's not a car; it's a shell, right? And you have no way of knowing otherwise. You have no way of knowing better. So again, that's a good way to think about it. That you don't want to just be a shell of a Muslim. You want to have both. You want to have the husk, which is that outward shell, and you want to have the kernel. You want to have that inward love of Allah. So he says, if a Muslim's heart is cut off from these tributaries of slavery to Allah, there's nothing to protect him from the slippery slopes of this world and the traps and snares of the shayateen and his own base desires. It's like sticking fresh fruit to a dry tree. How long will it be there before they wither and die? So, and then he quotes these ayats: abandon wrong action. This is a translation from An'am, ayah 120. Abandon wrong action, outward and inward. Those who commit wrong action will be repaid for what they perpetrated. And then he also says, and the other ayat to recite, but I'll keep it short. He says also, he who purifies it has succeeded. He who covers it with disobedience has failed. And this is referring to the heart. This is the Shams, the 91st chapter, verses 9 and 10. And the Prophet ﷺ also says in the agreed upon hadith, this is the sixth hadith in the Arba'in an-Nawawiyah. He said, indeed, there is a lump of flesh in the body. If it is sound, the whole body is sound. If it is corrupt, the whole body is corrupt. Indeed, it is the heart. So we have to start with the heart. If the heart is not sound, then nothing else matters. If the heart has wrong intentions, if the heart is bearing jealousy or envy or grudges against other people or ostentation, that's the heart is full of. The outward actions mean nothing. The outward actions mean nothing. It's for example, there's a hadith in which the Messenger of Allah was asked about a woman who would fast during the day and pray at night, but she would also curse people. She would also backbite people, gossip about other people, curse other people. And he was asked about her, and he said, "Hiya la shay, hiya la shay. She's nothing." Because what's the benefit? What's the benefit of? So this person fasts, this person prays at night and fasts during the day, but then spends the daytime insulting people and gossiping about people and backbiting people and denigrating people. What's the benefit? And it shows because Allah says in the Quran that the salah tanha al fahsha wal munkar. The prayer is supposed to prevent wrong actions and abominations. Right. So if you're praying, and not just your fard, but the supererogatory prayers or witr or tahajjud, you're doing all these prayers, but that's not actually preventing. That's not making you a better person. That's not actually preventing you from speaking ill of other people, from engaging in backbiting, other things. So you have to ask, okay, well, what kind of prayer are you doing? How meaningful is your prayer? Are you actually concentrating your prayer, or is it just a perfunctory action? Are you just going through the motions, so to speak? Now, now, what he goes on to next what Imam Ramadan goes on after that, he says, now, we don't, he quotes another hadith from Sahih Muslim on the narration of Abu Hurairah, who says, Allah does not look at your appearances or your bodies, rather, he looks at your hearts. Now, we don't want to go to the other extreme because there's one extreme where people are always obsessed with the outward and they neglect the inward. Now, the other extreme is to focus all on the inward and neglect the outward. So that's why he gives a hadith. They mention this hadith that Allah does not look at your appearances or your bodies, rather, he looks at your hearts. That doesn't mean that your appearance or your bodies are completely unimportant. Because he says in the footnote, he says, this hadith does not mean, as some ignorant people think, or maybe they feign ignorance, that if someone corrects his intentions and purifies his heart, that there's nothing wrong with his leaving his obligation of practical acts of worship. Right? So someone can't say, well, my heart is pure, therefore I don't need to pray. Right? My heart's in the right place. I've rid my heart of jealousy and envy, and therefore I don't need to pray. I don't need to fast. I don't need to fill out these outward commands. And he said this doesn't make any sense because he says if someone rectifies his heart and purifies his soul, it is not possible for him to fall short in fulfilling all the exalted rights. The correct meaning of the hadith is that performing acts of worship and obedience without those acts being rooted in righteousness or in a righteous and sincere heart will not bring the slave close to Allah at all, because just as Allah the Exalted sees your outward actions, he also sees what dwells in the depths of your soul. So again, they have to be together, right? So someone who claims that, well, I have a pure heart and I purify my heart, and therefore I'm above the outward commands. I don't have to pray and I don't have to fast. Well, A, this is kufr, because this person is denying the clear commands of Allah and what is ma'lum min ad-din min ad-darura, what is known of religion by necessity. But how can this person have such a pure heart if they're denying Allah's commands? How can this person have a purified heart? This person is not rushing and willingly and voluntarily to worship Allah and obey Him. It's a complete contradiction. Um, and he says, yes. Yeah, so he then goes on to say, he quotes the scholar Izzuddin Abdus Salam, who says, the essence, the haqiqah, is not separate from the law. The haqiqah is not separate from the sharia. Rather, the law is replete with the rectification of hearts, realizations and states, resolve and intentions, and other actions of the heart that we already mentioned. Knowledge of the outward rulings is knowledge of the bulk of the revealed law. Knowledge of the inward rulings is knowledge of the finer points of the revealed law. No one denies any of this, unless he's a believer or iniquitous. Right? Because he said you can't separate and say like, well, this is Sharia and this is Haqiqah, and they're two distinct categories. You're commanded to pray and fast near the hour, but you're also commanded to purify your heart. You're also commanded to not have ostentation and jealousy and malice and rancor and so forth in your heart. They both apply. It's just that certain things come under the purview of a qadi for him to judge and for him to execute punishments or whatever. And then there are certain things that are between you and Allah. It doesn't mean they're not part of the Sharia. See? Again, I think it's something I've mentioned to you before. It's like when we talk about the qadi, like the role of the qadi, it's like, yes, we look at the qadi, we can say, yes, the Sharia is a public law, right? The qadi can only punish or enforce something that is public. So if a Muslim drinks alcohol in the privacy of his own home, that's between him and Allah, because no one knows about it. That's between him and Allah. If he comes outside and he's in a drunken stupor and he starts, walking into people and acting obnoxiously, now we have a case of public drunkenness. And then people can grab him. There's, it's our version of citizen's arrest, and they can take him and say, "This, we think this guy's drunk." Take him to the qadi. The qadi sniffs his breath and says, "Yeah, you're clearly drunk," because now it's public, and the qadi can punish him. But if someone is drinking in the privacy of his or her own home, what can you do? Right? Allah says in Surah Al-Hujurat on the last page, وَلَا تَجَسَّسُوا, do not spy. Right? We don't go in for all this, hardcore surveillance state. Well, maybe if we spy on everyone, they'll stop sinning. No. Right? Because again, you take it back, you step back, you have to realize that an overall objective of the Sharia, an overall objective of the Sharia on earth, because again, the Quran was revealed on earth, was revealed in paradise, revealed on earth. The overall objective of the Sharia is not to eliminate evil, because that's not possible. That's not how this world works. You cannot eliminate sin. But what you can do, to a large extent, is you can push sin outside the public sphere, so that people are not openly doing things. People are not openly sinning. That people are going to sin, that's obvious. People will sin, okay, but if they are going to sin, or when they do sin, it's going to be in private. It'll be in their own homes, behind closed doors. That's what the Sharia aims for. You cannot eliminate sin. So therefore, this idea that some people have had of, if we set up some totalitarian surveillance state, we can just prevent all sin. Like, no, that's insanity. And that will really tyrannize people and ask them to do something that's completely impossible, because we're human beings. We all have our weaknesses. So he says here, he goes on to say, as for the position that the inward or the essence refers to another revealed law, right? So it's like the haqiqah is something else, that the intellect grasps by way of specific devotions or by attaining nearest to Allah the Exalted, and that it abrogates the outward laws and rulings because the inward replaces it. This is one of the most dangerous ideas put forward by criminal hypocrites and libertines. So this is very dangerous idea, this idea that you can focus on the outward, or sorry, you can focus on the inward and neglect the outward. He said this is a very dangerous idea. And he says no one uttered this except for hypocrites who infiltrated Islam. Sometimes, he says, sometimes they claim to be Sufis, sometimes they claim to be Shia, but overall it's a false idea. And that's why he quotes the Risala al-Qushayriya, which there's a quote from Imam Ghazali. Imam Ghazali, he says, if someone claims that he has a station with Allah such that he is relieved of the obligation to pray, and that it is permissible for him to drink wine and consume the wealth of the ruler, as some ignorant Sufis have claimed, there's no doubt that it is obligatory to kill him. It's obligatory to execute him. Right? Because he's saying this person, you have the implication that this person is not a Muslim, this person has committed kufr. Indeed, killing him is better than killing 100 unbelievers, because his harm is worse. So this person is leading people astray. Right? He's telling people that's permissible because I'm so pure, I've risen above the outward ruling, so I don't have to pray, I don't have to fast, I can drink alcohol, I can fornicate. This person is causing huge fitna. And Junaid, the great Sufi Junaid, was asked about the state of these people. He said, people who disobey Allah by stealing and fornicating are better than them, because again, their sin is connected to them and the few people that they might steal from or fornicate with. Right? But when you have someone who's actually calling to this stuff openly, that is a very, very serious tribulation. Izzeddin Abdus-Salam says, there are people who imitate people, but they're nothing like them and bear none of their attributes. Right? So people who they imitate the other man, they imitate the Sufis, the real Sufis, they imitate them, but are nothing like them in reality. They are worse than highway robbers and waylayers, because they lie in wait for those who are seeking Allah. See, they lie in wait for those who are seeking Allah. So they take advantage of people's sincere intentions. So there are people out there who are sincere. They want to draw near to Allah, but they don't know anything. And then these charlatans, these hucksters, they take advantage of these people. Say, oh, it's okay. Just follow me, and I'll teach you, and I'll raise you a leg. And then, okay, now that you've reached this state, you don't have to pray anymore, and you don't have to fast. And it's okay if you want to drink. It's okay if you want to fornicate. And they lead people astray. Says they rely on ugly words that they have uttered against Allah. They have disgraceful etiquette with the prophets, meaning they don't follow the prophets. They ignore their teachings, the messengers and the pious scholars who follow them. They forbid their associates. This is an interesting point. They forbid their associates from listening to the fuqaha, because they know that the fuqaha forbid people from associating with them and following them. So you can have people who fall under the guise of these charlatans or these hucksters, and while they're with these people, right? So they take this person as a murshid or a sheikh. While they're with that person, they're actually prevented from studying, right? That murshid, right, quote unquote murshid, this quote unquote spiritual guy, he won't let that person study fiqh. So that person could be with that murshid for months or years, decades even, and they never study fiqh. It's like there's a reason why this person never studied fiqh. Because if that person were to study fiqh, that person would realize, hey, wait a second, I'm committed to pray regardless. I'm committed to pray. I'm committed to fast regardless. I'm committed to abstain from the haram regardless of my supposed spiritual state. You see, so this is a type of abuse that certain people are abused. Um, and what Imam Ramadan goes on to say after that, he says, now, when someone discovers this, as does happen, someone might discover this. Someone might discover that, hey, wait a second, so and so is a charlatan. So and so is talking about Sharia and Haqiqa, and he's using that distinction to abuse people, or maybe he used that to trick me, and he led me down a wrong path. Or he used the term qada and diyana, or he used the term batin and zahir, and he used that to deceive people. Now, someone might notice that, and therefore they reject the terms. This is what point he makes on page 19. Someone might notice that and then reject the terms. They say, "Oh, this Sharia Haqiqa distinction, this is just nonsense. This person just using that to abuse people, to trick people, to deceive people." And Imam Bully says that's not an issue. We don't mind you that as long as you understand that's the reality. If you reject the terms, fine. But the reality is that yes, there is that distinction in Islam. There are outward rulings, there are inward rulings, whatever you want to call them, and they must be in sync. So that's why he says what is important, however, which people must realize, is that the outward rulings of the revealed law, which are embodied in statements on the tongue or actions performed by the limbs, these deeds are not accepted by Allah, and man is not rewarded for them, nor is his responsibility lifted if his heart is not in the state that Allah has commanded it to be in. The soundness of the soul and the heart is the indispensable foundation for the soundness of one's deeds and their bearing fruit. All right. So again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about your prayer being accepted. Right. The faqih or someone knows fiqh, they can tell you that yes, your prayer is valid because it fulfills the conditions and it all the integrals have been fulfilled or performed. But no one can tell you that your prayer is accepted or not, whether Allah has accepted your prayer. That again comes down to the state of your heart. What state is your heart in during the prayer? And he says, as long as people understand this, and Imam Ramadan goes on to say at the bottom of page 19, he says, as long as people understand this, it doesn't matter what terms they choose to use after that. Are you going to call it Sharia Haqiqa, Zahir Batin, Allah and the end? Doesn't matter. As long as you understand that both are obligatory. You have to your heart has to be as Allah has commanded it, and then you with your limbs you perform the actions as Allah has commanded you to do so. So he summarizes this on page 20. So we have to have these cardiac motives. That's the best way to translate the word qalbi, the adjective qalbi, cardiac. I'm not trying to be a physician here when I translate this. There's no other way to translate the word qalbi. It's an adjective. It's a cardiac. The motives of the heart. So the motives of the heart, intentions of the heart, have to be in sync, in harmony with outward behavior and actions. Because if there were no command for this harmonious relationship, then how would you distinguish a believer from a hypocrite? Because again, a munafiq can do all these. A munafiq. Again, we go back to the munafiqun in the time of the Messenger of Allah in Medina. They did all the outward stuff. They prayed. We assume they fasted, right? They did the adhkar. They put on all the outward show of a Muslim, but inwardly they didn't believe. So of course there's a command that your heart has to be in sync, right? The munafiq, his heart does not match his actions. It does not match his statements. And he said, also, were it not for the necessity of this harmonious relationship, jihad and sacrifice would have no meaning in Islam. Why are we sacrificing? Because again, the fuqaha, for example, when they talk about like a shaheed, they say this, you'll find this in books like Taqadat al-Sadida by Sheikh Hassan al-Kaf. He'll explain like the shaheed is of three categories. So he says you can have a shaheed al-dunya, shaheed al-dunya wal-akhirah, and shaheed al-akhirah, right? So he says, for example, a shaheed of the dunya and the akhirah is someone who dies on the battlefield, right? This is someone who dies on the battlefield fighting the unbelievers, such that because he died on the battlefield, he's not prayed over, he's not washed, right? He's just buried as he is. And his intention was to die for Allah. His intention was to fight for Allah. He had the right intention, and therefore he's a shaheed al-dunya and shaheed al-akhirah. Then you can have a shahid al-akhir, right? So you can have someone who dies, but not on the battlefield, right? They die from a disease, they die from a stomach ailment, right? Like the mabtun, the mut'un, these are about. There's someone who dies for another reason on the battlefield. So this person is shahid al-akhirah, right? And again, their intention was sound. Um, so this person is treated as a shaheed in the afterlife, right? Here, no, they're not shaheed dunya because we don't shroud, because we still shroud them and bury them as normal, right? We bury them as we would bury any other normal believer. And then the third category is the shaheed dunya. The shaheed dunya is the guy who went on the battlefield and died fighting unbelievers, but his intention was not Allah. Maybe his intention was to show off. Maybe his intention was to have a reputation. Maybe his intention was the booty afterwards, or whatever it was. And he died in that state. So in the dunya, the Muslims treat him as a shaheed on the battlefield. So we're not going to shroud him. We're not going to wash him. We're not going to pray over him. We're going to bury him as he is. But in the akhirah, he has no reward because Allah knows what his intention is. Allah knows why he did what he did. Why was he on the battlefield? Allah knows why. So, and that's why Imam al-Buti finishes this chapter. He says, were it not for the necessity of this harmonious relationship, like were it not necessary that there's this harmonious relationship between the limbs and the heart, then the Muslims would be today at the pinnacle of might, unity, and strength, right? Their masjids filled to capacity, their thundering minbars, their tongues calling to Allah, and their overflowing sciences would be enough to take them all to the summit, right? If that were the case, then that's all. If we just had to do outward actions, and that was all that was important, then our outward actions, regardless of our intentions, that alone, our outward activity, all this activity that I talked about, these conferences and these events and these big Deen intensive, whatever it is, that would be enough. That would just take us back to the summit, back to the peak of civilization. Like, no, it hasn't happened. It hasn't happened. Why? Because where are the hearts? And that's why he says the hearts, however, are far removed from and far behind all of this. There's no harmonious relationship in the outward and the inward, between the outward that we use to deceive one another with and the hidden reality that the knower of the unseen, i.e., Allah, is fully aware of. For nothing deceives him about anything. And that is the end of the first chapter. Alhamdulillah,